noticed that we are trialing auto captions with this session. They are automated. I'm not typing them. Some of them are quite accurate. Occasionally it puts the odd word in that isn't quite correct. The last session, something that I was saying like to come up as POTUS. I don't really know what I was saying that was making it type POTUS. Maybe it just had the American politics on its brain. So we'll bear with this and see how that goes. I'm going to kick us off straight away because we've only got the hour. With a very quick overview of why you're all here. So this is a session on redistributing power through participatory grant making. We're really interested in building a movement of participatory grant making. I think this session or this series of sessions is a really good example of how this practice isn't just at the margins anymore. We're having on a regular basis 200, 300 people signing up to find out more about what this is. And because of that, we want to be able to share what we're learning, share the movement, connect people up, because sometimes this work can be hard. So please do tweet about it. There are 2 Twitter hashtags that we're using for all things participatory grant making. The first one is participatory grant making, which is not only a horrible word to say, but it's also a horrible word to spell. But you can use the hashtag participatory grant making or shift the power, and just say that we are making it as accessible as possible. If you caps lock the first letter of a hashtag, 1, that means that screen readers can pick it up, and 2, it just makes it much easier to work out what hashtags are all about. You can follow my Twitter at Patterson Hannah or my Medium there, and I'll share those later on in this session as well. So this series of events is to launch a report that I wrote around participatory grant making. I was really lucky. A year ago, the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust provided me a grant to enable me to travel to South Africa and the US. I spent 2 weeks in Johannesburg with the other foundation, learning about their participatory approaches to supporting lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans and intersex people in the 13 Southern African countries. And I also spent time traveling around the US, meeting over 40 people working in this space. And one of our speakers is one of them. So this series of events is to kind of launch this report, to share it with you. I'm not a report reader. I don't enjoy reading through pages and pages. So I tried to write the report in a way that I would use it, and hopefully you might use it as well. So instead of 50 pages of text, what I've tried to do is write the report in kind of chapters that cover a certain issue. You don't have to read the whole lot. You can pick and choose what works for you, what's helpful at the time that you're using it. So please do have a look at that, and we'll share the link to that after the session. Once I came back from my fellowship, we decided to set up a community of practice, which we started in March at the beginning of the UK lockdown. That was kind of like a weird time to be starting stuff, but actually worked quite well. So between now and March, we've now got 200 members involved in the community of practice. If you're interested in joining, please do send me an email and we can make sure that you're added into that. The community of practice meets every month. We have 2 sessions, but they are the same agenda, just on different time zones. So the first Thursday of every month from 5 p.m. till 6 p.m. in the UK time, or the first Friday of every month from 8 a.m. till 9:30 a.m. in the UK time. I'm not sure. In the UK time? In UK time. Well, that's my time. You can work it out for your own time zones. Time maths is not my strong point. We have a rolling programme. So there are 3 sessions that we run, and we rotate them throughout the month. So February, which is our next one, so will be around peer support. So it's an opportunity to meet other people in the space, unpick an issue, get to know other people struggling with the same challenges, share and celebrate all the things that you're achieving. On March, we do a deep dive, so we're particularly looking at the issue of participatory budgeting and participatory grant making. And the April session is around advocacy and looking at how we share this practice wider across the field. So, and then it keeps going. So we go back to peer support, deep dive and advocacy. There's also quite an active Slack group. So if you are interested in Slack, which is a new thing for me, but is a great way to connect and share resources and community with other people, we can add you in. So this is one in a series of sessions that we're hosting. We also have sessions on evaluating participatory grant making on Monday, systematic change through participatory grant making on Thursday next week, the future of participatory grant making on the 27th of January, and operationalizing, which I'm not sure is a word. Google seems to struggle with me using it quite a lot, but I'm going with it. Operationalizing participatory grant making on the 28th of January. If you're interested in any of those, please do let me know, and we can sign you up to them. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our speakers. When I was traveling across the US, I spoke to lots of people and prepped for my fellowship, and nearly everybody that I spoke to in the US said, you have to go and see North Star Fund in New York. They're amazing. They're really, really cool. They do excellent work, and I was really, really grateful to be able to spend time with Elz to learn more about their processes, how they work, their different methods of grant making. So I'm really happy that she's here today to share some of that insight with us. Derek Bardowell, who is an author. If you haven't read his book and you're interested in race in the UK, it's called No Win Race. It's an incredible exploration into racism and sport in the UK, and I can highly recommend it. And if you would like to listen to Derek read it to you, as I did, it is also on Audible, and Derek has read it himself, and it's lovely. So you can listen to his dulcet tones read you his book. Derek's actually the reason that all of this is here, because he was my manager when I was starting out in this space. He created the opportunity for me to kind of get on with the work. He had to deal with a lot of my stress and tears, trying to manage to get it through. And he encouraged me to do the Churchill Fellowship. So he is basically an instigator for all of you being in the room, which is very, nice to have you here. And Swatee, who is an absolute legend, she has been involved and instigating a list as long as your arm in this space. I first came across her work with an organisation called With and For Girls, and actually had the privilege, as the last thing that I did before I didn't leave my house for nearly a year, was to watch the With and For Girls award ceremony, watch some incredible girls from across the world come together in London and celebrate the achievements that they have created and made through a participatory approach. But Swatee is involved in lots of different things, so she'll be bringing in experiences from, I'm sure, With and For Girls, but also the work that she does with Healing Solidarity Collective, Empower and Global Fund for Children. We've all been on lots of these webinars. I know that Zoom is a fatigue-inducing thing at the moment. So what we're going to try and do is have a bit of a conversation. I'm going to open it up for these guys to talk to each other, introduce a bit of their work, introduce some examples that they are interested in, and then we will have a look at questions from the audience. Yeah, I'm really excited. I can't wait for this chat. So I'm going to let you guys kind of like introduce or outline kind of your thoughts and feelings in this space. I know some of you have been around the houses. This is a kind of a topic that at certain points in time gets pulled out and we all talk about it and wax lyrical, and then nobody does anything about it, and here we are again. So it'd be interesting to hear kind of like your takes on that, how you're feeling about kind of having another one of these sessions talking about the same kind of things, and whether you are seeing difference in this space, and generally any kind of like hope or joy that you are also feeling would be amazing. So I don't know if any of you guys would like to kick us off.
I'll start.
Go on, Elz.
I'll start. Okay, just 1 minute. Hi, everyone. I'm very honored to be here. I am zooming in from the United States, where we may have an inauguration of President-elect Joe Biden or another attempted coup. And in the context of all of that happening, what we're learning is that everything that North Star Fund has been talking about building power amongst those who are most impacted by injustice, is proving to be true. And if we protect and build power amongst the most vulnerable, then it rights the ship for everyone. North Star Fund was founded about more than 40 years ago on the very idea of shifting power to the people from whom it was taken. We were founded by a group of young people of inherited wealth who understood that the reason why they were wealthy was because their families were able to inherit and accumulate wealth from the labor of brown and Black people on stolen land. And they knew that the way that their families were doing philanthropy was simply reinforcing and strengthening the power dynamics that already existed. And that is the superior wealthy making decisions on who was worthy enough for the blessing of their support. And so these young people didn't want to continue that, so they pooled their funds and they convened a group of activists, people who were on the ground and understood the work, not only because they were the ones doing the work, but because they were the ones most impacted by the injustice that they were trying to change. And that kind of participatory grant making is still the hallmark of the way North Star Fund does our work. And because we've been doing it for so long, for 40 years, it's enabled us to deepen our practice and find even more and meaningful ways to also redistribute power. So it's not just having a participatory grant making process and then having strange and racist power dynamics everywhere else in our management practices and in the way that we talk about the work and the way that we manage our teams, but all of the different areas where there is an imbalance of power and how we can correct that. So one example is I am a fundraiser at North Star Fund, and a lot of other philanthropic institutions don't need fundraisers because they sit on endowments and have accumulated wealth. Whereas at North Star Fund, we're not trying to accumulate wealth or be gatekeepers to funds. We fundraise for every dollar that we give out. And if we have a great year and raise a lot of money, we give more out. So the more we raise, the more we give. Thankfully, because of the pandemic, well, not thankfully, I'm misspeaking right now. When the pandemic hit, our donors really stepped up and gave more and gave again. And the same happened with the global mass mobilizations in support of Black lives. So we found ourselves with having exceeded our pre-COVID revenue expectations, and we're able to double our grant making, which was really great. I will stop there so that I can hear from the other colleagues on the panel. And again, I thank you for inviting me to this talk.
It's so nice to have you here. Derek or Swatee, I don't know if either of you want to chip in next.
I'm happy to chip in. And thanks, Hannah, for inviting me here to speak. I guess I go back to the early days of the program that you developed, and also give thanks to Baljeet Sandhu, whose value of lived experience was so pivotal to that. And I think it was that idea and that concept that would potentially be the lens through which the portfolio, the UK portfolio that we worked on at the National Lottery Community Fund, would be delivered through. That it wouldn't be a fund that is a percentage or siloed into the corner of the institution, but suddenly, as it's starting to prove effective, that it would start to be the lens through which all of the grant making through the fund or through the portfolio would be delivered. And I think one of the things that was really, and I don't have the stats off the top of my head, but one of the things that was really sort of stunning quite early on the program was just the amount of people that came into that program that had never been funded by the fund before. It was completely new entrance into the fund. It was completely new set of people across the country, and that ability for this particular fund, you know, which was significant in terms of size, but actually small in relation to what the lottery has given out, for that to be able to reach different parts of the country in ways that other mechanisms hadn't, I thought was really stunning. So I still think that if we're talking about this, we're talking about, you know, really designing models where we don't go back to pre-2020 ways. What we have seen is more organizations, more funders start to use participatory grant making. There's a lot of misappropriation going on. There's a lot of co-option. There's a lot of dodgy practices going on. So there is certainly an element of, and we're seeing that across the board in terms of diversity and exclusion and anti-racism in grant making. There's a lot of really ropey practices coming on. There's a lot of extractive organizations that I've certainly dealt with over the years who are suddenly jumping into this space. You know, so there is definitely a piece of work here in terms of the credibility of it. But the big thing that I would say is we've moved forward a little bit in 2020 in terms of more progressive grant making. We should have got there a lot earlier, no doubt. But we are in a position now to not move backwards on this. This should be something that becomes standardized. But if there's a very quick takeaway that I would say is that with your very large funders, it's really difficult to shift them around in a way that is genuinely authentic, where this type of work is centralized and not marginalized. So there is also a plea from me that says, you know, while you are trying as large funders to work some of this stuff out, you also need to have faith and give space to a number of organizations that are independent, a number of funds that are being developed outside of those frameworks that are able to do that legitimately, and also to be able to develop systems that really doesn't have those levels of hierarchy that you have in most of the large foundations, and be able to support those efforts as well. It needs to happen on both ends, that the central ones need to be changing their mechanisms as well. But at the same time, with the wealth, particularly those huge endowed trusts, the amount of money that they have, they can also give space and faith to lots of the other developing organizations that are doing work independently, trying to create their own endowments, trying to create their own funds, but doing that authentically through the lens of those that are most impacted by the issues that we're trying to challenge. They also need to give that money away. So I'll stop there and pass the mic.
Thanks, Derek. And I think one of the things that this community is really good at is actually we can bring together those kind of more traditional funders with those that have kind of set up and led as participatory grant makers, and start to broker some relationships between the two. And if you're interested in funding in this space, but you don't know where to start, Onward Granting is a great way of doing that. And we can hook you up with literally hundreds of organizations where this is their entirety. Like they start and begin with participatory grant making. You've got the Edge Fund in the UK, you've got Resourcing Racial Justice, North Star Fund, Frida Fund, With and For Girls, Disability Rights. Like the list is endless. If you are looking to break into this space and it's a bit daunting to hand over your decision making, we can hook you up with others who are looking for funding. Swatee, do you want to go for it?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you again, Hannah, for all of this, and just all the work that you put in behind the scenes. And for those of you that don't know, there's a community of participatory grant makers around the world, and we have been organized and galvanized and got systems and processes and meetings in place because of Hannah. So like big up to Hannah, because she's like massively organizing a lot of us in this space as well. So I think like obviously loads of things to react to that both Elz and Derek shared like through their experiences. And I guess for me, the centralized question around how participatory grant making speaks truth to power comes from, I guess the frame for me is that the wealth that has been accumulated in philanthropy has done so unfairly. You know, that amount and that accumulation of wealth is not fair. It's not normal. And so for me, I do believe as a wider frame for development and the redistribution of resources, we must think on a frame of reparations as a wider frame that we should consider. And I think for me, like participatory grant making provides a window into that opportunity as well to like truly involve communities, shift power, put kind of the redistribution of where these resources go to into the hands of community themselves. And as Hannah mentioned, my sort of journey into participatory grant making started in a private foundation, STARS Foundation. You know, our founder was a billionaire, and you know the decisions, we were a very progressive organization in what we were doing. You know, it was always core unrestricted funding to organizations around the world and trusting them, and we used an awards methodology to kind of pick up on the fact that those organizations were already doing incredible stuff, but still the decision making sat with our board or members in the global north that were deemed experts in children and young people's issues, and then gradually kind of moved. And I guess the big impetus for us that I think is one to share is, and I think it sits in that broader frame of shifting power, is that when we, you know, founded With and For Girls within the STARS Foundation, and we came together and co-founded it with lots of other funders, so including Empower, the Global Fund for Children, Frida, but also large foundations like Novo and Nike, Plan International UK, and this was like 7 years ago now when it actually founded. So it was quite early in that experience. And at the time when we came together, none of those foundations apart from Frida was doing participatory grant making. So I think there was like a newness to coming in and sharing power within a collaborative sense. But then there was this like deep belief that actually we want to fund girl-led organizing in the world, because girls sit at the bottom of every kind of intersectional injustice globally. Like there is no place in the world, including the UK or the US, where it's better to be a girl than to be a boy. And you know, I think there was just a report that came out from the World Economic Forum that said it's going to take us like 272 years to close the gender gap. So that gets further exacerbated by age. And so we went on this journey to be like, how do we really put adolescent girls in the decision making of what this program gives funding to, the kind of programs that we fund, but who gets that funding. And I think for me, the kind of eye-opening thing was that when you had a collaborative of funders, private, large, small, public, different ones, and you know, we had high net worth individuals also give funding in to the collective, there was a sense of already power was shifted, because none of us were controlling and calling the shots. And so it almost made it not simpler, but it made it much more attainable to be like, okay, well, we will put the decision-making power in adolescent girls' hand. And we're talking about 14 to 19-year-olds, like not the kind of older young people age, like these are like young teenage girls around the world. And I think the other thing that we did really intentionally, and this was again the commitment of all of the collective partners, and because of sort of the advice and leadership of Frida, who was a member of the collective, to like really go beyond, because I think when we go into participatory grant making, we also can fall like easily prey to like just doing the bare minimum, or just doing, you know, something that feels like, yes, we're going to put it into the community's hand. But as a global funder, we were like, well, we have to make sure that this reflects a global audience and global girls, no matter where they are. And so we had to make sure everything was language appropriate in the ways that we were doing it. We had to be really aware that young people are so far away removed from any access to redistributing resources. Like, you know, girls can't have, many of them will, you know, at that age, have never handled money themselves, and probably, you know, in a lot of contexts aren't able to without a man's approval and permission to do so. And so it was a real kind of case of how do we identify and work with these groups, how do we support them? And there was a deep recognition that we should not be doing that. We should be supporting local organizations that know and can do this work, and they need the kind of support. So we funded actually local organizations to run the participatory grant making panels around the world, and to design it with the community in a way that felt authentic and right to them. And I think it's like knowing that actually power isn't just about who makes decisions on money. There's something about global North versus global South, and making sure global South voices are mentioned, not just picking your kind of standout young people who are the ones that can easily go on stage and speak in a colonized language, but are the ones that are authentic voices, you know, and can actually, they actually represent girls around the world. There's also the understanding that, you know, the power differentials also in our space are, you know, that there are intergenerational schisms where power is not attained by anyone in some of those communities, and being able to balance that, right, you know, and getting that kind of dynamic. And I think also for me, it's the making sure that you're not urgent with the way that you're developing these, because I think there's this sense of, we've got to hit our targets, we've got to get things done. Urgency allows for us to pick the easier options and not kind of, and move towards perfection really, really quickly. Whereas I think we should be practicing progress over perfection. And I think there's also something about sharing that iterative learning journey with one another. And I think, you know, for me, I'm no longer with Women for Girls. There's a brilliant new team, and I stepped down last year, but I'm on the board of Global Fund for Children and Empower. And it's been really interesting just to see that actually through that collaborative experience, through doing supporting participatory grant making together, almost all of the strategic partners of Women for Girls now have their own participatory grant making programs. And so, you know, it's brilliant to see the work that Empower is doing with centering, you know, adolescent girls. They've even got girls advisory groups who are leading kind of strategic decisions around their grant making. And then Global Fund for Children recently worked with the National Lottery Fund on incubating a new fund in the UK called the Phoenix Fund with local community members that is getting funding to Black, Asian, minority, ethnic led organizations in the UK as well. And Derek and I have been part of the Phoenix Fund process as well. And so for me, it's been a bit like that journey and that evolution of us collectively shifting power, collectively learning together, and also just that we are all always learning, and we should be practicing and sharing openly our learning and successes so we can probe and adapt and change rather than hiding it for fear of exposing some sort of failure.
Thank you. On that, and I suppose there's a couple of things that came through from the last session that we did that were questions, and I was a bit overwhelmed and I didn't see them all. So there was a couple of things that I've been pondering on that you've kind of touched on slightly there, in that as we start to see a shift in like the sector and we start to see this as an actual movement, and more traditional funders are starting to say, actually, well, COVID has been like, you don't really know what you're doing, like you need to find better ways of doing this. It has fast-tracked a lot of the conversations that we've been kind of like grappling with in traditional funders. As we see a shift in traditional funders start to think to do this stuff, what I'm really interested in is actually, how do we not just recreate the power dynamics that we're trying to like get rid of, call it something different, and then call it something different, and then pat ourselves on the back for devolving power, because ultimately that's not helpful and that's not doing it. And how do we start to reflect and question our own practices, where we're standing, who is hired within these traditional organizations, because ultimately they all look like me. Like, how do we start to ensure that that conversation isn't lost as we all get really excited about like the new, although it's not new because grassroots communities have been devolving wealth in participatory ways for yonks, the new thing in the traditional funding sense. I'm going to let you guys chat a bit, so I don't know if either any of you have got kind of like comments on either that or what other people have said within the session.
I want to take a stab or offer one way that big traditional funders can not do this thing where they say, hey, participatory grant making, we're going to do it now because it seems that the movement is calling for it, but then just continue the power dynamics. One way that can help diminish that, of course, they're going to have to do their own learning on white supremacy and how to dismantle that and anti-Black racism, et cetera, is to make big multi-year grants to the community foundations who are doing participatory grant making already as they are developing their own program. Go ahead and also like give it to folks like North Star Fund and all of the organizations that are doing it. My question that I want to bring to the group, and I want to ask Swatee and Derek, you know, participatory grant making is hard. We're talking about the folks who are most impacted by injustice, and then we're asking them to do this whole other body of work, to look at applications, to make decisions. And we're talking about communities that haven't been trained in these leadership roles or not used to it and have cultural differences. How do we support them better to not extract their labor even more? I know we do everything we can to make it as easy as possible for them to participate. And I really regard our community funding committee as the heart, like they're, for me, the leadership body more so than our board of directors. You know, we give stipends for if they need childcare or if they're taking care of their elders, elder care, transportation, we take care of that. What are other ways we can support them?
Sorry, Swatee, you go.
No, you go for it, Derek.
No, I was just going to reiterate the point. And again, I'm going to probably just come back to this over and over if it's the one thing that people take from this. And I guess we're 2 weeks into the new year and already 2 weeks into what's already been a turbulent time for most people. I'm already seeing extractive behaviors that have emerged from funders around this. And part of it is that maintenance of control. And part of it is around this need for people to take credit for stuff and their status and things of that nature. And I guess my major issue here, and as well as a lot of people that are jumping onto this agenda. So, you know, coming back to Elz's point, one, fund North Star or With and For Girls and people that are doing it and who have already built really good practices of how to do it. Get out of the way. Because what's happening at the moment is lots of people are contacting me or contacting other people and they're saying, this is how we want to do it, this is how we want to do it. But they're not really doing it at the heart and soul of their organization. They're not really investigating or exploring where their wealth derives from and how they've accumulated their wealth, how extractive that wealth has been, and what damage that their investments have done traditionally. Okay, they're looking at where they can get percentages up in terms of their grant making without looking at what the heart and soul of what they are as an institution in terms of the damage that they have done through the accumulation of their wealth. Okay, so if you're not willing to do that, it's really difficult for any of this to stick, largely because what you'll have is really good people that will come in, that will run time-limited programs, and eventually they go. But the structures, the people, the systems, the way your wealth is managed absolutely stays. And that doesn't do, well, it does do something for you because it gives you a really good reputation. And you said, we've done participatory grant making and we've got our percentages of stuff to Black and brown led organizations, or we've done some disability justice work, et cetera, et cetera. But it doesn't stay and it doesn't stick. So what I urge here is, one, bring in the expertise into your organizations to do it. fund the organizations that are already doing it, but do not do this on a piecemeal basis. Do not do this on the basis of we need to get to 14% because that's the amount of BME people there are in this country. Okay, look at where your wealth comes from and be an organization that is legitimately regenerative organization as opposed to one that's extractive.
Hear to that. For everything that you just said, Derek, and thank you, Elz, for the question as well. I guess I would echo what Derek has said. I think that there's something also around, you know, as we look at like diversifying also for those foundations or philanthropic spaces that have endowments or have investments, it's also about applying, like, how do you take the same lens that you're thinking about on your grant making, and how do you also get participatory investment panels as well? And that is something that people are thinking about as well. So I think that helps the wider interrogation. I think it also is a way of kind of further interrogating and showing up in the space. I think also totally like fund the organizations that are already doing this work and are doing it well as well. You know, there are so many groups that are doing it. And I think about all of the incredible participatory grant makers and grant making bodies that are around the world, and the amount of money that they're giving out is tiny compared to how innovative and how impactful that money is as well. I think there's still like this fear or reluctance at, you know, like, oh, it's somehow really risky giving money to communities to make decisions on, which I find really difficult to reconcile with, because I think that the most impactful money, the most brilliant people that I've sat on grant making panels with and boards or advisory panels with have been people from the communities. And actually for me, adolescent girls, like across all of the ones I've worked on, they've been just, their frame and their analysis has been so powerful. It's always moved me to be like, they need to be at every decision making table. But I think that there's something that you also asked, Elz, which is like, practically, what are the things that we should be thinking about as funders? I think don't rush the process and don't rush the experience of the individuals that you're bringing in, because I think that creates a space for extraction. I think it creates a space for like triggering of negative experiences for people. I think it also is, it runs the risk of being like, if you're just getting people in to hit targets, you actually forget about their journey through this process. You don't take a holistic approach, and it almost becomes like, you know, the circus has left town and these people have dropped me, even though I was really important, for like a couple of weeks or months, and now they don't want to know me, and now they're not responding to my emails. So I think that there's just something there about how do you actually hold people authentically. And I think as well, one of the things is, you know, you have to support the journey of them being involved in redistributing of resources. Yes, they absolutely know, but they also need to be fully transparent and accountable with them as to like, what stage of this journey are they making decisions in, what is happening before they're getting the decision, and what happens afterwards, so that they have like a clear idea. So for instance, if you've got a participatory grant making panel that actually is going off making a whole list of kind of recommendations on who they're going to get the funding, and then you've got to go away and do due diligence, it's not that that's the wrong thing to do, it's just that they deserve to know what a philanthropy process looks like, what are all the steps that we have to go through and why, so that they understand what their role is in the process as well. Because I think for us, it was always like explaining to girls what is due diligence, why do, you know, like tax authorities and governments and our board require some of these things. And they would say, you know, they would test us on that. Well, can you also, like, why do you really need that? Is there a way around it? You know, there's so much innovation that comes from sharing the pathway. And I also think honoring time, like we don't flinch bringing in like a strategy expert from a strategy firm and paying them like thousands of pounds or dollars or hundreds of pounds or dollars a day. Like pay the people that are making your decisions to come in from the community as well. Like give honorariums, give stipends. I think that's like the minimum that you can do as well for honoring their time and honoring their labor. And I would also say, depending on the topic of what you're also bringing them in to think about, make sure you hold healing spaces as well. So with and for Girls, we did kind of holistic kind of self-care support. We had practitioners come in to hold healing spaces. And sorry, they still do. I just still think about it because I've left, but obviously the program's still going and it's still doing all these incredible things. So I think they're the things, is making sure you honor them and their process and their journey, and make sure they have access to the, because I think otherwise you're setting them up to fail. If you're requiring them to do something, you're not being transparent about your process, and you're also not acknowledging the kind of things that they might not have access to that they deserve to have, because it's not that they are not smart enough to process the information, it's that you haven't given them the information that they are far away from the power of that knowledge, and you are in a responsibility to share that with them.
Can I just wanted to add on to that, Swatee, that the other thing that I would also take heed of, there's not one participatory grant making initiative or thing that I've been involved in that hasn't been unbelievably oversubscribed. And when I say oversubscribed, I mean oversubscribed with really good quality stuff. And one of the things that, and this does come down to shifting power in a different way, but it means shifting power internally to those that are delivering the programs inside. There's not one of these programs I've been involved with that shouldn't have had 3 or 4 or 5 times the amount of money to be distributing that amount of money. I've worked in philanthropy for a lot of years, and I have seen unbelievable levels of wastage from really large organizations with way more higher percentages of money than what's being given away at the moment in participatory grant making. So there is another thing here for me that says, if there is something that you do here, it is you have to, one, look at it long term. Don't be doing this over 1 year. Don't be doing this over 2 years. This should be very central to everything that you're doing, and you need to give it, as Elz and Swatee have said already, lots of space, because over the years we have had multi-million pound large charities that have been given the space and get recontracted, and they get recontracted for doing stuff that at times fundamentally damages our community. So now give our communities and our grassroots organizations the space to be able to do that. And some of it will work and some of it won't work. But the bottom line is, we can't be in a position at the end of this year where we're still looking at a 1-year program or a time limited program or something where only 5% of those that have applied into it have got those funds. Because I'm telling you, if you funded some of the organizations that have come in for the Lived Experience Leadership Fund or some of the other funds, Phoenix Fund, it's still not going to break the bank of your organization in terms of what you're funding. And trust me, those organizations are doing things on the ground up. And as I said, I turn around and I come back to this. If we get to a point where the progression of this means that as a disabled person or as a Black woman, you are still applying to an organization where you cannot find or see someone that looks like you in that foundation, that's making the decision about your work, there's someone that's got true lived experience of these issues, then nothing's really changing. And again, I go back to this, it needs to be structurally changing. But at the very least, if you want to start with something, as I said, start with making this a longer term commitment and start by extending the amount of money that's going into these communities. So we're not talking about 5% or 10% of those applicants that are getting these grants.
Thanks, Derek. We have had some questions in from the audience in amongst some excellent chat, which I will probably lose all of them. So please forgive me if I don't get to your question. I think there's an interesting one that's come through from Dennis around, actually, is there ways of shifting the way that people hold the wealth Are they on the call? Are your boards on the call? Are your trustees on your board on the call? Who needs to hear this stuff? Are they listening to this stuff? How do we manage that? Elz North Star, I've got a really interesting way of how you kind of bring together people from different wealth backgrounds. I don't know if you want to touch on that or say a little bit more.
Sure, that's a great question. Thanks, Dennis. There is a way of fundraising and doing grant making that's called the Giving Project that many folks, many of the social justice funds across the United States are employing. It is a 6-month program that has people who are across all racial backgrounds, cross-class, so folks of the cream of the 1%, along with folks who are in transitional housing, and everyone in between, are working together and learning how to do grant making. It begins on a foundation of race and class training so that they're all speaking the same language and understanding the dynamics of power that exists prior to them sitting in that room to how power exists in their lives now, and has them using the same vocabulary as they're working hand in hand with one another. We've heard over and over again that this has been the most diverse room that they've ever been in. And if you think about your own life and who you hang out with and who you work with, it might feel pretty homogenous, like it's not so far off. But in this room, doing this work together that is so meaningful, after that training, they then learn how to fundraise together and go within their networks and raise money for grassroots organizing. That is what we think is the real shift in what needs to happen for systemic change. Because if we only organize our own people and we don't go and talk to our super ultra conservative right-wing uncles during the holidays, like, change will never happen. So we need to, in addition to also fundraising, we need to also have people talk to the people who aren't doing this work. And then after they bring in their pool of money, and we get gifts from $5 to $200,000, and our donor diversity has gone from 10% people of color to now 40 and is continuing to grow. They then go through a grant making process where they hear from the most effective organizers in New York City and really learn about the issue. And that also enhances the way that they talk about the work, their own analysis in speaking to the issues and being able to fundraise for it. And the Giving Project has just been a really amazing way to raise money and make additional grants out of North Star Fund. And if you want to learn more, I'll put the link in the chat.
Thanks, Elz. We've had a flurry of questions. One of them is, at what point does participatory grant making truly become participatory? And I think this is something that the sector at the moment will particularly need to be grappling with as we kind of like expand and people become more interested in this space. How do we recognize, you know, what is extractive and what is not? Don't know if any of you want to.
I'm happy to take a step. I think the one thing to say is that I think participatory grant making, like on one side, it is about like true participation. I think there is so much that you can say about it, and I don't think we've got the time to get into it. But I think the real, like the centering of voices, making sure that they are supported, that they're acknowledged, that they are fully in decision-making power seats. But I think that also participatory grant making is a spectrum, and there are different ways that funders kind of can approach participatory grant making and to direct it. But I think overall, you've got to think about well, are you just getting a participatory grant making to validate the assumptions of your team or your board member and just ticking a box? And so, have you designed it in a way that you've set up the whole process to just be a bit like, this is the kind of profile of organizations that we want to get. These are the countries and the regions and the type of groups that we're going to get. And then you find a group that's going to, and you also have like a veto to be able to say no to some groups that might get thrown up through the process. I think that those for me are definite red flags to think about. But I do think, there's some great resources. Obviously, take a look at Hannah's report, but there have been other reports that have been done on participatory grant making, which look at the various different models and the evolution of it. But I think going to Derek's point, it's also about what are the layers of what this feeds into. So if it's just rubber stamping like a program, but isn't interrogating the way that the strategy for that program is set, the way that the decision for that organizations are set, the broader kind of governance and the interrogation of where the wealth sits, like for me, it's those kind of the chain of those layers have to involve the community. And also it's not just about involving them to be like 1 or 2 people on the board. If those people who are from marginalized communities get onto board positions, you also are putting real sort of disproportionate kind of expectations on those people for like what they're actually going to be able to change. Because I'm sure Elz and Derek will agree with me, like as people of color, you sometimes go into spaces and meetings with this language presented to you that, we're bringing you in for your expertise, we really want to get your thoughts on this, we like XYZ, and then you present them with sort of hard or radical ideas and they're like, that was great, bye. But then they'll like put out some kind of press release that like worked with you or that you were involved in something. And it's very triggering, I think, for people of color or any marginalized group to be like utilized in that way. So I think it's also just about, the change is not just like, let's get a few people from the community onto our boards either. It's like the board has to accept that they're going to be able to present like roles and push. And I'm really lucky. I'm on 2 boards that listen and respond and allow me to be able to push back on. And I think that's the kind of environment that you want, is that actually risk is about the risk that communities are facing, and it's not like fiscal or legal risk, because we've got loads of like resources to be able to manage those risks. What we don't know is how to manage the risks that are preventing people being able to fully realize their rights and like live in justice and liberation in communities. Like for me, that's where the risk of boards needs to be focused, and not on fiscal or legal risks.
And some of this for me is just about being an effective organization, because when you break most of this down, I always come back to the fact that a lot of the best stuff that I've done are those projects that were really grounded in their communities, were taken in intersectional layer. They weren't trying to revise this stuff years later. They weren't isolating right from the beginning. These were effective organizations or people, movements, or individuals that were doing this. You're talking about, if you are as an institution taking X amount of tax money away by not being able to pay tax money, or whatever it might be, as a high net worth individual that we as taxpayers have to pay to match your massive donations that you're giving to, I don't know, big arts institutions or Oxford University or whatever it might be and stuff. If you are doing this type of giving, right, I'm talking about, are you giving your money to things that is just maintaining the disparities that exist in society? We don't know that. There's just not enough data to say any of that stuff. Do we have a strong enough regulatory body that's going to police any of that? I'll leave that for you to be able to answer that question about regulation in the charity sector in the UK. But what I am saying is, if you want to be effective, then you have to create the terms and conditions, or let people from communities create the terms and conditions that enable them to have the space to be able to deliver this type of work. Because I can guarantee whatever they're doing within those communities will not fundamentally be isolating other communities later on down the line. And for me, that is an effective use of money that is only, in the scheme of things, when you look at government money, a small percentage of money. So we really cannot afford to be replicating the ills of government with such a small percentage of money. And if you've got the freedom and independence to be bold with this, I don't even look at this as bold. I just look at it as the right and effective way of doing things in the future.
Thanks both. We've got 5 minutes left. Elz, I don't know if you've got any final comments that you want to make, or pearls of wisdom, or anything that you'd like to chip in.
I'll just close by saying thank you to all of you for all of your excellent questions and contributions and the work that you're doing. When we're talking about power, from whatever seat that you sit in, as a program officer, as a fundraiser, board member, trustee, ask yourself, who are you accountable to? Are you accountable to the movement and justice, or are you worried about your boss or the trustees, or this report that you have to write and present? If it seems that your accountability is going up to like powerful people, shift that, change that, however you need to do it, and be accountable to the people who are doing the work, and have the vision for a different future and are trying to create systemic and lasting change.
Thanks, Elz. I want to say a huge thank you to Elz, Derek and Swatee. It's been, I can't believe it's an hour already, it's flown by. It's been wonderful to hear you speak. Thank you so much for your time, wisdom, commitment to the work, all the stuff that you do day in, day out to kind of tackle this stuff. A little thank you to Connor, who's been helping me with the tech and the digital side of things as I struggle with all the pop-ups and everything that's flying my way. Just a reminder that we do have the community of practice around participatory grant making. The next meetings in February are a session on peer support. It's an opportunity for you to come together and meet other people working in this space. We've had a call from people to set up some kind of caucuses within this. So within the peer support center session, we tend to do small breakout groups to help people tackle an issue. This month we'll be looking at caucuses and how we deliver those. So there'll be some caucuses around specific issues. So people of colour, if you want to meet other people in this space, have a bit of a healing rant connection with others, please let me know. There'll also be breakout rooms around specific issues or specific topics. So if you're grappling with your conflicts of interest policy or your risk appetite, then we'll set up groups for those as well, for you to meet other people in a similar space. We have recorded, I'll send the recording out, I'll send all the links that we have shared in the chat, as well as anything else that I can think of that might be helpful for you. There are future sessions coming up in the next few weeks, so if you are interested in signing up to any of those, please do. Thank you very much, everybody. It's Friday. Everybody in the UK, it's home time, although you've not left your home in days, but you can turn off this screen, which is nice, and go and stare at another screen. The US and the rest of the world, I don't know what time you're on, but eventually the end is in sight for Friday, and you can have 2 days of hopefully some chill. Thank you so much, everybody, and I will see you again soon.
Thanks,
Bye.
Hannah.
Thanks so much, Hannah. And thanks to Elz and Derek.
You too, Swatee.